Public Defense Commission. Oh, sorry. We'll start that over. Hello and welcome to the August 19th, 2026 meeting of the Oregon Public Defense Commission. I think we have a quorum, but Maura, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and do a roll call.
Yes, we'll do. Commissioner Inglesman is excused. Commissioner Harvey, not present. Commissioner Kay,
Here.
Commissioner Knabb,
Present.
Commissioner Leininger,
Present.
Commissioner Lopez,
Here.
Commissioner Olson,
Here.
Commissioner Plummer,
Here.
Representative Evans, not present. Senator Przanski,
Here.
Vice Chair Mandelberg,
Here.
and Chair Harris.
I'm present.
Thank you.
Thank you. That is a quorum. We'll begin our first agenda item. It's public comment. We received two written comments from Stacy Lowe and Carl McPherson. Those have been shared with the board, already posted online. We've also received two verbal comment signups. That's from Mr. Wirtz and Mr. McPherson. I think both are here this morning. They'll each be given 3 minutes to speak, and I will call you in order of receipt of your request. The first is Mr. Joel Wirtz. Joel, go ahead.
Do we know if he's actually online?
Yeah, he's online here. I think he's having an issue getting his audio going here, it looks like. Oh, gotta take the headphones off.
Try putting your cursor over your picture, and then a little microphone should pop up, and then you can hit unmute.
Can you hear me?
There it goes.
Yes.
Yep.
Thank you, Chair Harris, for helping me fix that. Members of the commission, Director Sandrigan. My name's Joel Wirtz. I'm the director at Deschutes Defenders. That's the nonprofit in Bend, Oregon. I'm here to speak on not just Deschutes Defenders, but other public defense providers outside the major metro areas. We're well aware of the budgetary headwinds facing this state. As such, I'm offering two solutions based on the present realities, and that is one, fall hiring cohorts, and two, amended DAS projections that take into account attorney turnover. The current unrepresented issues will continue to plague our state unless we deal with both recruitment and retention of public defenders. As the agency is preparing proposals to the legislature, we'd ask that you include fall hiring cohorts, which are more cost effective than trying to scramble to find hourly out of the area attorneys every time an attorney leaves a provider. Oregon nonprofits are the main conduit of building a sustainable group of dedicated public defenders. We train new attorneys. But with lower number of people entering the legal profession and economic headwinds, we need to innovate by hiring new cohorts every fall. Second, I would ask the agency to work with DAS to come up with a formula that accurately reflects the loss of capacity in the system when a public defender leaves public defense. This would include the following: one, the wind down of attorneys' caseload; two, the transfer of that remaining caseload that has not been resolved; three, the time it takes to fill a vacancy; and four, the training of the new attorney that takes that position. I would ask the agency to work with providers to come up with an accurate formula that takes all four of these things into account. Again, an accurate picture of how many public defenders Oregon actually needs will avoid both unrepresented lists and the use of hourly out of the area attorneys, which are not as cost effective the nonprofit public defense. Thank you.
May I ask a quick question of Mr. Wirtz? I'm a professor at the University of Oregon School of Law. When you advocate for fall hiring cohorts, is it correct that you'd consider recent graduates for those positions, or are you thinking more of laterals?
The primary would be the hiring of new attorneys, which we would be interviewing in the fall, like other major public defense or large firms do, and funding that. So we don't have these long, lengthy, month-long positions being open. And also, we're asking for the flexibility if we do find a lateral hire, that those could be including it in these fall cohort that we're asking to be funded. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Wirtz. Next up, Carl McPherson. Mr. McPherson, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Harris, members of the Commission, Director Santrigan. My name is Carl McPherson. I'm the Executive Director of Metropolitan Public Defender. I want to speak about two issues, the unrepresented crisis and the budgetary planning coming up. In terms of the unrepresented crisis, public defenders are working extremely hard. The unrepresented crisis has gotten improved and the numbers have gotten better, not only because of Roberts, but because of the hard work of public defenders in the counties in which are affected. And this is in spite of serious challenges. And I want to raise those challenges with you. First, significant jail access issues. Almost every single week in Multnomah and Washington County, our jails are either fully closed for legal visits or partially closed for legal visits. This is causing significant disruption to our ability to do our work because we are being denied access to our clients. These are the only two counties that I'm aware of in the state that are having such issues. Secondly, significant increase in filings in these two counties. Per OJD data, in 2018, Multnomah County had 2,992 felony filings. In 2025, it was 3,625. That's more than 633 more filings in 2025 on just felonies. Does not include misdemeanors, which has continued to increase since the rollback of ballot measure 110. Those numbers exceed the number of unrepresented people. That is significant. It's also significant that we are routinely seeing charges that cannot be proven being charged, and we are spending time on that. A significant number of hours. Last week, our office had, in 2 days, a not guilty on a just cause law case in Washington County, a not guilty on a just cause law case in Multnomah County, a not guilty on attempted murder in Multnomah County. Just cause law cases carry 25 to life as a mandatory minimum. These are significant charges. In one, the jury came back in an hour, and the general consensus was the case should have never been charged. So that is also a significant hindrance to the unrepresented crisis. Lastly, we've completed a report for MPD in 2025 for cases closed in 2025, criminal cases, in which a trial was conducted. We achieved an acquittal in 53.8% of those cases. That is a staggering number and is representative of our attorneys and our teams working extremely hard on behalf of their clients. It's also representative of cases that should have never been brought to trial. Lastly, on the budgetary issues, I agree with everything Mr. Wirtz said. I'd ask you to please review my letter, and I know you will. I appreciate that. The letter really is designed to show all that public defenders are doing in the state that's not actually being financed and fully reimbursed, particularly investigation, administration, overhead. In terms of cohorts, we have 16 people starting on Monday for training at MPD. Only 2 of them are licensed lawyers. Those were both judicial clerks that completed a judicial clerkship and now are starting. The other 14 are recent grads, and they will not be barred until October 10th. And so OPDC has agreed to pay for the training portion at a reduced rate, which we greatly appreciate for the first time, but they cannot really start picking up cases October 10th. Thank you very much. Happy to answer your questions that you have. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. McPherson. That completes public comment. The next item is Director's Update. Mr. Sanchkrin, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. And Mara's going to pull up some slides. My Director's Update.
Oh, excuse me. I see Commissioner Lopez.
Yes, I had a couple of questions for Mr. McPherson. Is he still here?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, a couple of things. One, I know that the bar approved a program that paralegals could handle certain cases. Does that spill over to the criminal venue, or is it simply civil, like domestic relations?
I am 90% certain it's only civil.
Okay. All right. And so in general, though, looking at the records and statistics, your office is doing better than it was even a year ago in terms of having access to clients and clients having access to attorneys. Am I correct in that assumption?
The jail access issues have gotten worse. In
No, I
terms
meant the
of
client access from arraignments. Are clients being arraigned and given attorneys, or are they still being turned away?
there are some no, there are still individuals because of capacity issues for all of the providers in Multnomah County in particular, that there are still clients that are going on the unrepresented list here. Yes, in Multnomah.
How does this year stack up to last year?
I believe I would want to do a deeper dive. I believe it's gotten a little better. Yes.
Good.
But it comes in waves, Your Honor, because of attrition. So, we just had a run of people leaving our office, which then it impacts your ability to take on cases, and other providers as well. But, MPD we're at 93% of MAC utilization in Multnomah County right now, and we were at 94% in Washington County. So,
okay. And one last question. When I was part of a consortium, we had a significant client base that was big enough that a terminal and a video was installed between my office and the jails. Is that program totally discontinued? I'm talking about 1990s with low tech but high resolution.
it is not discontinued, but if the jail says they're understaffed or they're closed, then often those are shut down as well.
Boy, okay.
Right. And for an attorney, you really should see your client at the jail. And if it's a routine check-in, I understand the video visit, but you really should be going to the jail, particularly because of the discovery explosion and your need to review discovery with your clients.
Oh yeah, I understand that, but there are other things like reviewing plea petitions and talking about how to get a hold of family to get them to the different court dates. Those things can be done by video.
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Director Sanderson, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Mara, if you could pull up my slides. I have a little bit of a longer director's report today covering several topics. Please feel free to stop me at any point as we move through the slides. And Mara, it looks like the slides, I'm not sure if it's just my view, but there's a small slide and then your video there. I'm not sure if we can make them any bigger. Or if, there we go. Oh, or not. We'll give it just a moment. But we're going to start off with our standard unrepresented update. There we go. Thank you, Mara. So next slide, please. So as has become the routine at the agency, we released our July 2026 unrepresented numbers through a report that we send out to you as commissioners and to various stakeholders who have elected to receive this at the beginning of August. As we've seen in prior months, as of July 31st, we've seen another slight reduction in the number of unrepresented folks across the state. Consistently, as even was mentioned by some of our public comment folks, public defense providers have been working extremely hard to meet the need that we're seeing out there for our clients. And so we're at 94.4% MAC statewide for our providers, almost 92% MAC for our trial division at this time. And OPDC assignment coordinators continue to make a significant number of assignments for cases that are a little bit more difficult to find representation for. So almost 600 cases in July with a little over 175 subject to veteran. Next slide, please. The primary focus that we have in all of our reporting is on our 4 crisis counties. When we look at just the raw month-over-month changes from June 30th to July 31st, we did see a reduction in the number of unrepresented folks across all of our crisis counties. However, in Jackson and Douglas counties, we remain concerned because while there was a reduction from those 2 points in time, you can see that for Douglas and Jackson County, the overall trends have been upward in both of those jurisdictions. I think that in Douglas County, some of that can be attributed to Roberts refilings that we're seeing. I think some of that also can be attributed to the fact that we have been shifting a lot of our resource from our Central Valley trial team to Multnomah County, especially as we ramp up the rapid resolution docket in Multnomah County to try to address that issue. And so that's something that we're going to have to come back to from Douglas County perspective in the near future. In Jackson County, there are some other dynamics at play. We have some folks who are out, at least in our trial division. We're also trying to take some cases in Klamath County where we're seeing some retirements and wind downs there. And so that's another area that we're going to have to focus on. We did give permission to the local nonprofit provider in Jackson County to hire a cohort in this upcoming October, and presuming that all of the folks who are in that cohort pass the bar, we should see some relief, at least at the lower misdemeanor level, as we roll into the fall. And in Multnomah and Washington counties, we've been seeing more sustained declines. The decline in Multnomah County has been a little bit slower than what we're seeing in Washington County. In fact, in Washington County, we've continued to see a pretty significant drop even into the middle of this month. We've been able to work with some folks from Yamhill County, for example. The case numbers in Yamhill County have been a little bit underwhelming just because there have not been as many cases to assign there. And so we've pointed some of those providers to Washington County to take some of those cases off the list, and we're making a lot of headway there. And so we're very happy with what we're seeing in Washington. In Multnomah County, we will soon have 3 rapid resolution attorneys doing work there on that docket, along with 3 rapid resolution staff. We also have 4 additional staff that were given to us during the 2026 session who will soon be in the county to take cases. I believe 3 of them start in September and 1 will start in October. And so we're going to see a pretty significant impact in Multnomah County soon. Next slide, please. I also wanted to briefly touch on the State v. Roberts impact. What we were able to look at that I want to bring before the commission today, just as an important data point, and is also covered in our status report that we have submitted to the legislature, is really trying to suss out, I think, one of the things that was mentioned by one of our public commenters, which is, what is the Roberts impact versus the more systemic impact of being able to find attorneys for folks who are unrepresented in our crisis counties. And what we were able to see is when we compare the number of cases that have been dismissed by Roberts versus other cases that have been unrepresented for a period of time, but then are resolved in another fashion, they're found an attorney. Around 22% since Roberts of the dip that we're seeing in our unrepresented crisis is due to Roberts. And that means that some of those, or maybe many of those cases, could be refiled. However, what you can see from the figure that we have here on the right is that those Roberts dismissals, as we've talked about in the past, were very heavily weighted in February. And in fact, when we look at places like Multnomah County, 40% of the dismissals were Roberts dismissals, and many of those were focused in February. The share of Roberts dismissals since, you can see, this is the little red part of the lines on the histogram here, has been much, much smaller. And so it shows that most of the churn that's happening in the system is not necessarily reductions when we see the lines going down due to Roberts, but they're due to hardworking public defenders taking cases, the agency finding cases, or public defenders for cases that are a little bit more difficult. And so when you look at that longer term Roberts impact as we continue to get farther away from February, then I think that 22% number is going to continue to go down. And so Roberts is having an impact. There's no doubt about that, but it's certainly not something that's responsible for the lion's share of the reduction that we're seeing over time. So that's what I have for the unrepresented update today. I'll pause just for a moment for questions before I move on to our next topic, if there are any questions.
Any questions? I had one question, Ken, on the unrepresented numbers on, was it Douglas County that saw the significant increase in unrepresented? I think it was
Right.
Douglas. Yeah. What are the causes of that, and what is the current MAC utilization rate for the different providers there? Do you have any information on that?
Sure. So one of the stats that I showed at the last meeting was on Roberts refilings. We know that the highest percentage of Roberts refilings of any county was in Douglas County. And that's one thing that we included last month. And so some of that rebound, initially what we saw was we had a downward trend, a big Roberts dip, and then a bounce back close to the trend that we saw previously. And so a lot of those are attributable to Roberts refilings. We also, as I mentioned, we do still have our trial division. We have some really important trials coming up. We were supposed to have a trial this week that was delayed till next week, and I think we have 2 more next week as well. The trial division is taking in Douglas County, but we've not been taking as many new cases there as we have been working to shore up Multnomah County. And so some of that is just as we remove that resource from Douglas County temporarily, there's a bounce back, right? To your question about utilization, when we look at the Defense Consortium, they are at almost 95%. The nonprofit is at 99%. We do have one other provider that is a bit lower in the 70 percentile range. I'll have to figure out what's going on with them, but that's looking at our dashboard as of today. And so for the most part, our providers in the area are working at a very high percentage. I think the overall utilization in Douglas County is almost 93% from all of our providers.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions on this report? Okay, go ahead, Ken.
Next slide, please, Mara. And then, so what I'm going to talk about briefly now. So one thing that we have done is we have turned in our status report that we mentioned very briefly at our last meeting as well. And one of the items that we discussed in our status report is an agency reorganization that we have been working on internally for quite some time. Originally, we had hoped to do some reorganization during the last short session. I was working very closely with our then LFO analyst, John Borden, on that. And we continue to work on agency reorganization principles after short session as well. And we're finally at the point where we've been able to wrap up much of this work, and we're going to be asking the legislature to, at least from a budgetary perspective, bless this reorganization that we have done as we go into the next session. I told the chair and the vice chair in advance of this meeting that in some levels this is a reorganization that in some ways is not very large, but I think in other ways, maybe more symbolic, I think is a pretty big shift for the agency to try to bring ourselves in alignment from a budgetary perspective, from a legislative intent perspective, into a more lean or well-functioning agency than we've seen in the past. So I'll go through a couple slides. I'm trying to distill a lot of information down into just maybe 4 or 5 slides. And so please stop me if you have questions as we go along. Also, I'd be happy to discuss in more detail with anybody who has questions, one-on-one or something like that, if you have the time. So let's go to the next slide, please, Mara. So I've already gotten into a little bit of the background as to why we were looking at doing some reorganizations. Some other justifications for why we've been looking at this is that when I was appointed, for example, one of the charges that I was given by the governor was to do an organizational assessment of OPDC to see if there were improvements that we could make to the organization itself. But then also, this is an agency that has grown substantially, both in the number of folks that we have at the agency, the number of tasks that we've been given at the agencies, and the number of divisions that we have at the agency over time. And sometimes when you have iterative growth over multiple biennia, the way that the agency is then constructed is not necessarily how you'd put it together if you had started from scratch. And so after those years of iterative growth, we wanted to look at how we were actually structured to try to come up with something that would be better if that was possible. We also, because of that iterative growth, behind the scenes, and this is the most boring aspect of this, we have a lot of misalignment between where folks are budgeted and where they actually sit from a day-to-day working perspective. And on one level, that's not a huge deal. I mean, it's frustrating for the budget folks, both at LFO and internally for us and CFO. And so we want to make sure that we have appropriate alignment there, that we're just saying that if you work in a certain division, you're also budgeted in that division. We also were seeking greater simplicity. And like I mentioned, we wanted to be aligned with legislative intent. And I have a small version of our old org chart here that shows, if nothing else, one thing that we wanted to look at is that we had different levels of the organization. Essentially, the top level in this small illustration to the right are the divisions that have been traditionally under the purview of the executive director. That's myself. The divisions that are on the lower rung were divisions that were under the purview of the deputy director. And so I will go to the next slide, or actually, Mara, if you could go to the next slide, a little bit bigger here. couple illustrations of some of the things that we were looking at. First, if we look at the top left-hand little bubble here, we had a lot of misalignment across our different organizational tiers. The appellate division, for example, for a long time, the appellate division was our largest division. It was one of the only divisions that we had at the agency, and so it was under the executive director. It was aligned in that under that executive division. When the trial representation division, however, was created, it was aligned under the deputy director, added there, and so now we have this misalignment where we have one of our direct service provision divisions being overseen by myself, another one overseen by our deputy director. We just need to make some decisions as to how do we align those together, because while they don't provide the same types of services, they have the same motivation, right? And so we want to try to align those. We also had some construction of our compliance, audit, and performance division that was out of alignment with legislative intent. That was actually the first thing that motivated a lot of these discussions. And then the central motivating question that I was trying to ask myself and our colleagues as we went through this was, does this organizational approach align with our mission, but then also the key services provided by our agency? So next slide, please. And so I'll go over now, this is a list of the changes we're making. I'll then show a visualization at the end. I'm a very visual person, so to me, without that actual chart, it's hard to grasp all the things that we're doing. But I'll go through each of these in turn real quickly. So first, the key alignment changes. Or actually, first, I just want to mention that for the vast majority of employees at OPDC, they'll experience little to no change either in their alignment or their day-to-day work responsibilities, the vast, vast majority. And so that's why I've wondered, is this a big change? Is this a small change? Is it a symbolic change? But at least for most folks, there's nothing that they have to really change in their day-to-day. But here are the key alignment changes. First, we're going to be renaming CAP, the Compliance and Performance Division. CAP is going to, or CNP is going to report directly to me, the executive director. And the primary focus of CNP going forward is going to be on the quality of public defense service delivery across the state and ensuring that quality services are being provided across all different groups, geographies, essentially everybody who is entitled to public defense, that they are seeing quality representation. Internal audit is going to be moved out of what we've been calling CAP. That's why we're now going to call it compliance and performance as opposed to CAP, and report to the executive director consistent with DAS administrative rules. As we've transitioned from the judicial to the executive branch, we're now subject to DAS administrative rules that we weren't in the past. And one of the requirements there is that the internal audit division report directly to me and then also to you all. So that you have a direct connection and I have a direct connection with that work. Our day-to-day contract compliance responsibilities will be overseen by a new division that we're calling the Defense Services Division. Previously, that day-to-day contract compliance work was contained within CAP. That was something that was not aligned with legislative intent. The legislature, when they created the CAP division, essentially said that the day-to-day management, policy decisions, and otherwise of this type of work was not supposed to be located in CAP, and so we've moved that out. We're also establishing a small group called the Office of Legal Resource Management that's going to be within that Defense Services Division that will report directly to the agency deputy director. The notion there, and you'll see this on the chart in a moment, is that the Defense Services Division is going to consist of basically three things. The first is that day-to-day contract management. And so that's where our contract analysts that we have that work directly with providers day in and day out will be located. Those are all professional, non-legal staff, however. And so while they have a really good feeling and relationships with or feeling for what's happening in a jurisdiction and relationships with providers, they don't have that legal background to be able to, at times determine whether something that's being requested is entirely reasonable just based on their own experience. They don't have that courtroom experience. And so the Office of Legal Resource Management will consist of Deputy General Counsel positions that have folks who've been experienced in the provision of public defense who will advise them where needed on that type of those types of questions that they have. That will also be the office that's responsible for qualifications and for the drafting of standards, those types of things. And so we wanted to make sure that those two things are co-located together. The third arm of that Defense Services Division that you'll see in a moment is that we're shifting pre-authorized expenses over with it. They used to be in separate divisions across the agency. That was something that made communication between those divisions a little bit more. You had to be very purposeful to communicate because you're not located together. We want all of that located together so that when we're talking about the day-to-day management of any of our jurisdictions, that everybody is working under the same umbrella. Next slide, please, Maureen. As I had already previewed in one of our previous slides, the appellate division is going to be aligned with the trial division. That changes nothing day to day for trial division or appellate division. That's just more of an organizational thing to make sure that they are together. One day, if I had my druthers, I would love to have, a state public defender who is over all of that, for example, that could be, the person who has the background, who could be over all of our trial division and appellate division. There's no money for that right now at the state, but I'd love to have something like that. So having them aligned together, that could be a preview of something like that happening perhaps in the distant future. We're also moving our facilities section from budget and finance into the administrative services division to be more consistent with other executive branch agencies. And then the last thing is the other portion of CAP that we have right now is policy, and our data team are both located in CAP. Again, consistent with legislative intent, those were supposed to be moved out of CAP several biennia ago, and that has just not been done yet. And so we're moving those into the administrative services division because, again, these are groups that actually impact policy. They draft policy, or the data team works in that day in and day out management of jurisdictions. Those were things that were never supposed to be in CAP in the first place. And so we'll go to our last slide for this portion of our meeting, and we'll see that what we tried to do again is we have fewer green boxes than we had before, as you can see, and they are more appropriately aligned at a single level. I've also added in the little blue boxes, at least how we're trying to define what those core agency services are. When it really comes down to it, we are an agency that the vast majority of what we do is we procure legal services, whether that's through public defenders themselves, expert services, other trial support services. And so that's what our defense services division, with that defense services unit, having the provider liaisons, PAE, case assignment coordinators, they're in one little box. The legal resource management unit is there as well, as I've already discussed. Direct legal services, then we have our appellate division and trial representation division as our next one here. That's the direct services that we provide as the agency. Our agency operations is then our next core agency service, and that's where we have most things have not moved around, but you can see the addition of policy and data there, facilities, but then we also have HR, IT, those types of items. Budget and finance at most agencies is contained in administrative services. However, given the budget challenges that we've had at the agency and the fact that I'm still relatively new, I have elected to keep budget and finance directly reporting to myself. My goal would be, as there is more financial stability within the agency, to put budget and finance in administrative services in the future. And then finally, for that oversight and accountability role that we play, our compliance and performance division is included on the far right. Again, I'd be more than happy to talk at great detail with anybody who has questions, either now or one-on-one. But I wanted to make sure the commission was up to date on this. Also, it's going to play into some of our budget discussions that we have later in the meeting when we have a presentation by Ralph.
Thank you. Any questions by commissioners of Director Sanchagrin on this particular piece of his presentation? Senator Brzezinski?
Thank you. Ken, regarding the direct legal services, I can see there's not the little lines for each of those, but there's this line that's going horizontal between the appellate and the trial rep. What does that represent? Is it just because the nexus of the two working together based on it being in the trial level and then going to the appellate, or what does that mean? Or is it crossover of use of personnel?
That's a great question, Senator Brzezinski. And I do notice too that I have one little line that's missing that would have gone from all the way down to that horizontal line. That just means they're on the same level. I guess the other way we could have achieved that is by having a line with then individual lines coming down from it. But it should not suggest that there's any overlap between them. In the same way that if you look at administrative services, HR and IT, they work together, right? But they don't share a resource or anything like that. And so it's just to show that they're on the same level with one another.
I can see, yeah, with that clarity of just dropping the line straight down, then I can see how they still are under that division, and it's just reflecting that, not showing that there are crossovers. Thank
Yes.
you.
Yep. I apologize for that line being missing. That's just me and being a bad PowerPointer.
Well, 99.9% looks great.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, thanks, Ken. Let's move on.
Moving on. Okay, next item. Next slide, please. So I'm providing a more detailed budget update today on court mandated expenses and pre-authorized expenses. Next slide, please, Maura. So agency staff, as we've continued to monitor both of these divisions, we've become increasingly concerned with some of the invoicing that we're seeing relative to the amount of money that we have in these various divisions. These are things that when I've done the monthly budget updates in previous meetings, we've been able to see in the projections, but it's really becoming much more clear as we've moved through that there are some pretty significant budgetary concerns in this area. And so one thing that we have been working with with CFO on is how to appropriately engage with the legislature to make sure that we have funding in the relevant buckets that we need to be able to continue to pay the bills and invoicing that we're getting for both of these programs. And so one thing that we did is we submitted a rebalance request to the legislature's emergency board for the September legislative days that are coming up next month, requesting the transfer of some funds that I'll describe over the next few slides. So let's go to the next slide, please, Mara, to kind of define the issue that we have here.
Quickly,
yes.
Ken, I may here. It looks like Senator Brzezinski still has his hand up. I don't know if he had some input onto this particular issue or just.
Oh, I apologize. Yep.
Okay. Right. Thank you.
Okay. So the two divisions that we're talking about here are court mandated expenses and pre-authorized expenses. Court mandated expenses pays for attorneys to take hourly cases. We have a total budget of $63.36 million, which equates to about $2.64 million per month that we can budget for court mandated expenses. Now, these are for cases that have already been assigned in many situations. We'll actually go over that in just a moment. And so these are liabilities that the agency has that it must pay. And so as we receive the bills each month, that's where we try to we hope that we're within budget, but we don't necessarily, as you can see, have any control over that, and we are over budget in that area. Monthly, what we're seeing in court mandated expenses is being over budget by around $1.13 million per month. You can see that has varied over time. Some months, like February of 26, we were much closer to budget, but then that was followed by a March month that was one of our highest invoicing months that we've seen over the past biennium. The issue is less acute in pre-authorized expenses, but has become more of a concern in the past 4 months or so. Pre-authorized expenses pays for investigation, expert testimony, and other associated expenses. The total budget for pre-authorized expenses is just over or just under $102.5 million, and that comes out to be about $4.27 million per month. And as you can see, the PAE billings in the beginning of the biennium were relatively, other than June of 25, consistent with the budget. Sometimes a little bit under, sometimes a little bit over. But certainly in the past several months, certainly starting with January of 26, we've seen that we have been over budget in those areas as well. The main focus, though, I'm going to have is on court mandated expenses, because that was the issue that we flagged for the legislature as our kind of more acute issue at the moment. So next slide, please, Maura. So we're going to talk about now just what are the causes of some of these overages that we're seeing in court mandated expenses. And there are a few, and there's going to be additions to this slide as we go along. I just didn't want to overwhelm everybody with too much at the beginning. The first cause that we have is the agency shift from billing at the end of the case to monthly billing in April 2024. So there was a decision made by the commission in April of 2024. Traditionally, if an hourly attorney took a case, they would keep track of all of their hours and all of their other expenses through the case, and then only once that case was closed would we pay for that case. And that was recognized, I believe, at the time. This was before my time, but what I've been told is that that was recognized as a deterrent to folks taking hourly cases, because especially for long-term cases, if we're thinking about a murder, for example, those can last several years. And so for an attorney to float those costs for that period of time only to be paid at the end of the case, it was being seen as a deterrent to folks taking those cases. And so the agency made a shift toward monthly invoicing in an attempt to try to encourage more folks to take hourly cases. That indeed achieved the goal of having folks take more hourly cases. But that shift had some other latent effects that I'm not sure were anticipated at the time. The first was that the shift in April of 2024 occurred during the budget build for the budget that we're currently in. And so the data that was being relied upon to estimate what we would need for our court mandated expenses was based on a system that no longer existed partway through the budget build. And so what has essentially occurred is that moving to monthly billing means that first we're realizing case costs in real time as opposed to at the end of a case. And so those costs are coming in more quickly. But also it means that the data that we used to estimate that bucket of money was off. And it turns out that we were underestimating the number of hourly cases that we had based on the old data regime compared to what we have now, where we believe we have a much better understanding of what those numbers look like. And so there was some budget impacts there as we went through that budget build that are still impacting us today. We also have seen that THIP cases, the temporary increased hourly payments for those types of cases, they still impact our budget. The THIP program, as you know, was ended at the beginning of this biennium. We were provided bridge funding of around $11 million to close those cases out. However, those cases that we have that are still on the rolls are continuing to proceed. And many of those cases are dependency cases, murder cases, other long-term cases that continue to be billed at a higher rate, even though we've already exhausted the funding that we used for that higher rate. And so that's an issue that we continue to see. If you could just advance the slide, Mara, we should see an animation here. The other issue that we've really run into as we've gotten better data on our hourly cases is that hourly billings are for cases that in many situations were assigned in a different biennium. So most of the budgeting that we do, and when we think about caseload forecasting, for example, it's all forward-looking, and it all assumes somewhat artificially that what we're paying for in this biennium are for cases and costs only, initiated in this biennium. And that's the way the legislature often likes to think about things, even though it doesn't always reflect reality from a budgetary perspective. One thing that we've really seen is because of the types of cases that we have in this hourly program, much of what we're looking at is lagged pretty substantially from prior biennia. And I can see that Commissioner Knabb has raised his hand. I'll just pause if Chair Harris would like to recognize.
Yeah, yes, go ahead, Commissioner Knabb.
Thanks so much. And this is maybe a little bit of field, but I'm just wondering whether kind of this analysis allows opportunity to have maybe a more top line understanding of the cost per case for hourly contracts versus either consortium or nonprofit or trial level, and whether that's contained in here or whether you're going to get to that. I appreciate this analysis, and I'm wondering whether it would seem to me that you're probably going to be paying more for these hourly cases than through these other methods, and I was wondering if this analysis touches on that at all.
Thank you, Commissioner Knapp, for the question. So I had not planned on covering cost per case today. The data that we're continuing to refine, yes, it does continue to give us a better understanding of how hourly fits into cost per case. It certainly does not, from what we've seen, change the conclusion that you just mentioned, that hourly cases are in general more expensive than either cases taken by providers externally, consortia and nonprofits, or our trial division. So this is the most expensive means for handling caseloads. And it is something that from a budget perspective that I'm looking at. And every way that we can take more cases, give them to providers, or take them at trial division as opposed to hourly moving forward. But I apologize. I won't have cost per case details today, but that's something we can bring back at a future date if that's desired.
Thank you.
Sure. Commissioner Manberg?
what controls, if any, does the agency have over court mandated expenses? In other words, if if a judge mandates hiring an hourly lawyer, for example, does the agency have the ability to say, we have other lawyers available and we don't have the budget for an hourly lawyer for that case? Or do we just have to accept whatever judges decide to do?
Thank you, Vice Chair, for that question. So if a judge orders us to take a case with a given attorney, once that order has been entered, that there's almost nothing that we can do about that. We do try to intervene on the front end. We do have our case assignment coordinators who are working very hard to try to apply. Essentially, we have been applying a triage approach for quite a while now, to where the first choice that we have for any given case is ensuring that if we have capacity within our local providers, that our local providers can take that case. If they are not available or if they are at capacity, then we look to see if our trial team can take that case. And only after we check in both of those areas would we assign a case hourly. However, as you mentioned, judges do not necessarily, we can ask them to follow that triage approach. They do not have to. There have been some instances where we've had some judges essentially over our objection give cases to hourly attorneys when we are sitting in a courtroom and even saying, we have capacity to take that case today. Can you please give it to us? And they have chosen not to. And so that is an issue that we have. We do see in our current data that it is around 50-50 as far as the share of cases that are assigned by OPDC ourselves to hourly attorneys versus cases that are assigned by judges that we may only learn about the day that we get our first in-text form or invoice from that attorney, along with a judicial order appointing them to that case. And so this is an issue that I've flagged with OJD, and we've talked about at the governor's office as well, that if you think about it just from the perspective of half of our CME budget is beyond the agency's control to assign, that's certainly a risk that is very difficult for us to manage, right? I don't necessarily know if there's a simple solution to that, but it's something that we've flagged because that's a very difficult way to move forward when you don't have control over your own budget.
Thank you.
Commissioner Plummer, then Commissioner Nab, then Commissioner Kay.
Thank you. My question is sort of related, and you answered it a bit already, but I was just going to ask, what is the primary driver of using hourly attorneys? Like, why are we using them? And I think you answered one, it might just be judicial assignment, but I think primarily it's when contractors don't have capacity is the reason we're using hourly employees. I'm sure there are attorneys, I'm sure there are sometimes conflicts, but I guess just to clarify, the primary reason we use hourly attorneys is because we don't have capacity with contractors. Am I right about that?
Yep, that's correct. Yes, if we don't have capacity with contractors or trial division, then the choice would be to utilize an hourly attorney or have somebody to be on the unrepresented list. And so that's where we've tried, whether it's through the expansion of trial division or even through the expansion of the number of positions that we have with contractors, to have that capacity, which we've already said is the cheaper route to do things, to take those cases. But as you mentioned, yes, it's a capacity issue, but then you already listed all of the reasons. Conflict cases too. Sometimes the only thing that we can find is an hourly attorney to take that case.
And then a follow-up to that. So it's a capacity issue. And is the reason, I know this is a complex problem, but like, is the reason we don't have capacity because we don't have money in the budget to create the capacity, or because the contractors can't fill the positions? Like, why is there that disconnect between contractor capacity and need for attorneys?
That's a good question, and I think you're right. It's a complicated answer, and I think it is a mixture of things. I think that, at least from a little bit more of an outsider perspective, I still think of myself some of these days as an outsider coming in. I think that some of it is a lack of data that the agency has had historically to really actually see what is the share of cases that go in each direction. And I think now that we have better data, something that I'm committed to is expanding, whether it's capacity through our contractors and or through trial division, because I'd rather see these cases go to lawyers who are working full time in this area wherever we can. But I think that some of it has been So some of it is it's a policy decision because where we put the money in those two buckets, one funds contractors, one funds hourly cases, right? And so I think that we can make some policy-based decisions to try to grow one area over another. And so some of it's policy-based, but then maybe the data we had in the past was not necessarily there to make the most well-informed policy decision. I think some of it has felt a little bit like a catch-22 as well when I've had some conversations. There's the narrative, and I'm not saying it's a bad narrative, but the narrative that we can't hire our way out of this issue because of fewer law graduates, as we've heard, which we know is a real thing, or the fact that we only have 3 law schools in the state. We're competing with other Western states to bring folks in. I think sometimes there's been a degree of caution and maybe over caution on the part of the agency to say, like, well, even if we had enough positions for contractors, I don't know if they could fill all of those positions. Certainly, as I hear justifications like that, my reaction is I'd much rather have the contractors try to fill those positions as opposed to just make an assumption that is a self-reinforcing one that basically maintains the status quo. And so this is a lot of what's going through my head as we go through the budget build for the next biennium to try to right this balance between hourly contractors and capacity contractors. It doesn't necessarily help us today, and especially as we see, as I was going to go to on this slide, most of what we've paid for this biennium is not even for hourly cases taken in this biennium. It's actually for prior biennia and maybe even 2 biennia prior. And so the hourly issue is going to be one that we can begin to try to fix. That's something I'm committed to. But because of the lag, it's going to take a while for that to come to fruition, like the actual payoff from it. And I apologize for kind of editorializing at the end of your question, but hopefully I answered the pieces that you were looking for.
No, that was helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Knapp?
Thank you. Yeah, I also wanted to kind of continue on the same train of thought. I just had a couple of questions on what the agency is doing to impose kind of billing and time, like maybe soft caps on time and billing requirements that might help bring that total amount down. And I understand that that's going to be a kind of you're not going to be able to reap the benefits of that, but I'm just wondering, has the agency engaged in conversations with contract attorneys to reduce those costs through imposing soft caps on the amount of time that might be more in line with what the agency is paying per case in these other arenas. And then also and it seems like this is somewhere where the agency has a pretty significant amount of leeway in changing billing policies and practices to maybe both de-incentivize these types of cases and get the billing in a quicker way.
Yeah, Commissioner Knapp, thank you for those questions. Getting to my conclusion, which was I think in another slide or so, what we intend to do is to bring a full roster of some different policy proposals to the commission in September so that we can talk about what some of those would look like. We don't want to be out of step with you all as we try to look at what some of those controls could be. Certainly from the 2 levers we have are the ones that you just mentioned, which we can talk about in September. The other one that we have, at least from a hourly case perspective, is just at least for the ones we can control for that 50% of cases that we assign, working extra hard to not assign those cases hourly wherever we can avoid it. And so I think that actually going back to my brief presentation on the crisis is a good illustration that those cases that we've been able to get our Yamhill contractors to take out of county in Washington County, all of those would have been hourly cases had we not been able to find that contractor capacity there. And so that's the most direct lever we have. Again, we may not see some of that come to fruition until next biennium, but at the same time, that's the one that we're most actively focused on. But we also don't want to make too many policy changes, at least without discussing those with you. And so that's what we have for next time.
Commissioner Kay?
Yes, to the extent judges are appointing these hourly attorneys despite other resources, has there been attempts historically, maybe at a judicial conference or elsewhere to educate judges about the budgetary issues? Or is this something else?
Thank you, Commissioner Kate. To my knowledge, I mean, I have not been at a judicial conference to talk about this issue. To my knowledge, the agency has not had these discussions in the past, but that I've been more in conversation with the central admin through OJD and, like I said, the governor's office on flagging this issue and trying to puzzle through what can we do. And that's certainly something that's jumped into my head too, that perhaps if I can come up hat in hand to the judges and tell them what impact this has, then it's something that we can address, and that's something I've done judge to judge here and there. At one point we had another situation similar to the one that I mentioned, and it was for a murder case, and I was able to look up at our dashboard and say that it costs just for a single attorney about $250,000 to do an average murder on an hourly caseload, and that's not too far off what we pay a contractor for a year to possibly take up to 6 murders. And so, to me, the maths out pretty easily. I think there's still a disconnect when you're able to assign a case and it doesn't hit your budget, however. And so, I think that's one possibility, is trying to communicate how those costs impact the system, but trying to work with OJD to see if there's other approaches that we can take as well.
Thank you. And did I hear that 50% of the cases are appointed by judges?
Yeah, it's just under 50%, right?
Yeah, that's a lot.
It is. It would surprise me. It surprised me for sure.
Yeah. Thank
Okay.
you.
I apologize. Oh,
Yeah,
thank you. Okay. Yeah.
so I had a couple of things, Ken, on the cases, the appointments, and the cost you paid. I understand those are measuring different points in time. And it would probably be helpful to me, at least, if we could measure like cases closed and what the billing was on those cases. So like misdemeanors. And then I think it might be helpful to see those by county and see which counties are the primary. Is there a county that's a primary driver of this? Because just on my raw, like eyeballing back of the napkin calculations, even with these two metrics, it looks like a misdemeanor is over $3,000 average billing. And that would be 67 cases under a contract, where we're now getting up to 300 or so, or 240 or 250. And if nothing else, that would help us know what counties, maybe there's a county or two that's a primary driver. Also, it would help inform the legislature. They should be funding additional positions either in the state trial division. State trial division is going to be cheaper than this, frankly, what we're paying hourly, or contractors where they have the capacity. So converting this to some sort of a MAC rate per county, using cases closed, ignoring bienniums because they don't matter on the case. The case closed, case open doesn't care about bienniums. They happen and they happen. So realistically, we're just looking at historical information over the last 2 years or so on this. And I think it would give us a clear vision of what the cost of this hourly program is. How do we justify it? Are there counties or practices or judicial practices that are unique to different counties, or DAs or defense bars in the counties? And I think that could help us frame a better idea of what kind of a delivery system we may need to address some of these issues, or whether or not we could change some of these practices. So I think converting that to that, and I'll be happy to work with the data team on that if that would be helpful. I think Aaron and I have worked with your data team in the past, and it's been, I think, helpful to get the right measurements for us.
And I think actually, Chair, a lot of that would be updating. This is very similar to the work that we were doing when we made the request to shift some hourly funding to trial division to take cases. That we had the breakdown by county. Unsurprised, I don't have all of that data updated or right in front of me, but unsurprisingly, the greatest share of hourly cases were going to be in the crisis counties, the counties where we were having trouble finding representation for folks. And so you're going to see those in Jackson and Multnomah County. I think those were number 1 and number 2, but I can't remember what order. And then it is relatively easy to convert those to MAC. And certainly when you do that, you could see that there are different ways to quantify whether it would be more cost effective to deliver these services by providers versus hourly attorneys. It always comes out to say it's cheaper by providers, but we can do that. It's something we've done in the past, so we can have that updated for you, and you and I can work together on that.
Yeah, and to be clear, sometimes the cheapest way isn't the best way. I get that.
Right. Well, right. And sometimes the cheapest way is just not possible. I think that as Commissioner Plummer pointed out, when we have conflicts, there are some times where we just can't avoid. There's always been hourly cases. There will always be hourly cases. I just think that there's maybe been a correction by need, but a correction too far in one direction. That is, we can try to be purposeful, as I said, in constructing a budget that has a better distribution of cases to each program. That's probably what would be best moving forward, just from a fiscal perspective.
Yes, Commissioner Lopez and Commissioner Mandelberg. Commissioner
Yes,
Lopez.
yes. Thank you very much for acknowledging me. A couple of things that are in my going through my mind right now is that the issue of the disparity between appointed cases and contract cases is really a bottom-up issue. I think if it's going to be addressed effectively, it's going to have to be addressed by presiding in each of our county courts. Now, that being said, there are two opportunities for our group to get the word out. The first opportunity comes in September when the judges have their annual meeting, and that includes circuit appellate court judges. And the second is in the spring, where the Circuit Court Judges Association has their annual meeting. Both have extensive continuing legal education programs. So I think that would be a very opportune venue for us to study this issue a little more, and getting that issue before all the judges in the state, or at least all the circuit court judges in the state. And after we would make that presentation, I would also be an advocate of having a special report that would be sent to all the presiding court judges in the state of Oregon, again, talking about the program to keep it above the radar for all the courts in our state. Anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Judge.
Commissioner Mandelberg.
I like Rob's approach to being able to compare by MAC rate the hourly cases and the contracted cases, to show how many contracted cases could have been assigned for the amount that was given to the hourly. But following up on Caitlin's comments, would there be a way to break that down by judge appointed hourly versus conflict hourly versus lack of capacity hourly? Because being able to break it into those three divisions would give us even more information, and certainly would give the judges more information about how judicial behavior is impacting our budget. Would also give the legislature that information. Because as has been pointed out, there's no way to get rid of conflict cases or lack of capacity cases. There probably is a way to get judges to stop their own hourly appointments when it is not needed in our system.
Thank you, Vice Chair, for that question. I mean, I think doing a breakdown between cases assigned by the agency versus cases assigned by individual judges would be possible. I would have to check with OJD. I know that when I prepared a report on the crisis several years ago, to find out which cases were conflict cases, or even just to find out the total number of conflict cases by county at a given period of time or at a point in time, that was a manual check by each county court. And so I remember that was something I had to work with OJD, and they actually had to reach out to each circuit court to find out how many conflict cases they had at the moment. And so I just know that's a much bigger lift, because it's not something you can just easily query in the data at a point in time. But that may have changed. This was back probably about 2.5 years ago now. So I'll just say that maybe things are different, but I can find out on that. So I know that we're over time. I'll try to press through these next couple slides. I appreciate all the questions. I think it's actually allowed me to hit on many of the things I'd wanted to cover anyway. I'll let you all look a little bit more at so the previous slide was really showing something similar to the visualization that we have here, that we have only recently arrived at the point where the funds that we are expending for CME are at least 50-50 there's a 50-50 split between cases that were assigned in previous biennium versus this biennium. From a monetary perspective, we're that 50-50. We have crossed over as far as the cases that were assigned. So now we are handling more cases, or a larger share of cases that were assigned in this biennium. But this is something that, like I mentioned, it's going to be a challenge, just because even as we try to get hourly case assignments under control, it's going to be something where we'll be seeing the payoff in the future.
Ken, are we supposed to be seeing some slides here?
Oh, yes, I can see some slides. Or Mara, if you could.
I can't. I don't know if that's a me problem or not.
I was seeing a slide. I don't know.
Me too.
I can see him as well.
I can now.
You can. Okay. Can everybody see? I guess if you cannot see the slide, could you raise your hand? Okay. I don't see any hands. Okay.
You're just trying to hide it from me, I guess.
Yes, Chair. You're the only one we don't want to see this one. So again, this just wrapping up. This goes to the notion that much of what we're paying for are expenses or for cases that have already been assigned, and so it's something that we can't really do too much about moving forward. And then final slide, please, Mara, on this one. So what is the agency doing? As I mentioned, we submitted a letter to the emergency board. We were requesting that $20 million be transferred from the adult trial division to the court mandated expenses division to cover these costs associated with hourly cases. Even with that transfer, the adult trial division will be able to meet all of its currently budgeted needs for contractors, and will be leaving around $1.3 million for potential adjustments for the remainder of the biennium to cover unforeseen items that we have. I don't anticipate the emergency board to actually do any action in September. At least what I've been told the plan generally is to make sure that the legislature is flagged for this issue, and that perhaps once we move into the next long session, there are some early session bills that may help us to move some things around that we need. And so I can't guarantee that will be the outcome, but that's at least what I've been told to kind of expect. And so, as I mentioned as well, we're going to bring some proposals for some possible cost controls to the board for your input in September, so that we can also see what we can, if we can stem some of the tide over the next few months. I see that Commissioner Knapp has his hand up as well.
Sorry, I'll be very brief, but I was just hoping in September, when you come with the proposal regarding the hourly contractors, that you also have maybe are able to include some proposals on court mandated expenses like experts and stuff and things
Yeah,
like
for
that.
PAE, yes.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
that would be the
That
plan.
may also bring down those costs as well. So that was just I just wanted to add that, and I didn't know if there would be a better time.
Yes, Commissioner Knapp, both of those would be included.
Thank you.
Next slide, please. And I know I'm way over time. So just a couple updates. Actually, you can see the updates here for our upcoming meetings that we're going to have as we go through the end of August and into September. Next slide, please, Mara. We do not have folks from the FCMS program here with us for this meeting. Essentially, the work that the FCMS team is doing is the same as the work that they were doing the last month when they did provide a more substantive update. Also, we have not received any questions from commissioners or from providers for the FCMS team to answer, and so they're not here today. We do plan for the next meeting, however, to have representatives from Baker Tilly. I know there were a lot of questions about the work that Baker Tilly is doing for the agency, and so we're going to have Baker Tilly come and explain the work that they're doing for you all in September. I also wanted to make an announcement about automated caseload emails. So one thing that we've been working on, it's a collaboration between our contract compliance analysts, our data and IT development teams. We've been creating automated caseload emails that can be sent out monthly to providers to make sure that their caseload reports are being turned in on time, so that we can turn those around, get them on our dashboards, have the information that I can pass on to you. And so I wanted to make sure that folks knew that those were coming. Everybody will get a caseload email is my understanding, whether or not you are not complying with submitting that information. And then also the status report that I've mentioned a few times, we submitted that to the Legislative Fiscal Office on August 3rd as required. There's going to be a very brief presentation on that in the upcoming legislative days in September, right after Labor Day. And so we plan to give a more robust kind of rundown of what's in that report at a future date for you all. But we most of the time we don't like to preempt the legislature and do a presentation that before they get to see the presentation. So I believe that that's all of the items that I have for you all today in my director's report. Apologies for the length. And as always, happy to take questions you have.
Thanks. Any final questions for Director Sanchagrin? Okay, if not, we're moving on to the next item on the agenda, which is Vice Chair Mandelberg's report on KPMs, I think.
Thank you, Chair Harris. So every year we are required to fill out KPMs. Most of them are filed by the agency and they're taken care of by the agency. But the board, the volunteer commission has its own KPMs that get handed out and filled and turned in every year. And we do this because DAS and LFO have required us to do this. We turn them in, and two things seem to be important about them. One is the percentage of board members who actually take the time to respond to the KPMs. And what these KPMs are statements, and you've seen in the handout what those statements are, and we agree or we disagree. So the number of people who actually fill them out is important, the percentage of commissioners. And the second is the percentage of yes answers to these questions. So when we did them last year, and there were a number of KPM assertions, they're not really questions, KPM assertions that didn't seem to make some sense to a number of commissioners. The questions or the assertions didn't seem to reflect the way that our commission actually functions. But at the time, we did not think we had the power to modify those assertions in any way. We recently discovered that we do have the power to do that. There really isn't enough time for us to go through all of the assertions in time to get the task done by the deadline this year. But the governance subcommittee thought that it was very important to tweak the first two assertions. They were the two that gave most commissioners problems with affirmative answers last year. So number one, the existing assertion is executive director's performance expectations are current. It was unclear to many commissioners last year what that really meant, what performance expectations were being addressed by this assertion. And so the governance subcommittee thinks that we can clarify that by saying that the executive director's statutory performance expectations are current. And that's because 151.219 basically sets out what the executive director's performance expectations are. And there has been no effort or even need on the part of the commission that we're aware of to add to those statutory expectations. So we're recommending just that little tweak to the assertion number one to clarify what expectations are being referenced. Number two, the current assertion is the executive director receives annual performance feedback. When we were in the judicial branch, there was no perceived need to give evidently performance feedback. At least when I came on the commission, as far as I'm aware, that hadn't been done before. Now that we're in the executive branch, the Department of Enterprise Services, which is DAS, completes an executive director performance review biannually, sorry. And Director Sanchagrin will receive his in spring 2027. That's because he was just actually officially made the director as opposed to being an interim director. And during that process, DAS will send survey questionnaires to each one of us on the commission so that we can provide feedback on the executive director's performance. The governance subcommittee has looked at a list of what those survey questionnaires will be as sent out from DAS, and they seem pretty thorough. So we will, in fact, have a chance to give that kind of feedback after Director Sanchagrin has had a full year as official director of the agency. There, we certainly could have a discussion in months to come about whether we as a commission want to add to those DAS questions. There is no time to do that now, obviously, before this has to be completed. It's a September, or I think it's October 1st deadline. And so we're suggesting, again, tweaking this statement to say, the executive director receives a biennial performance review. That is a completely accurate statement. The other thing that is involved in the materials that you've gotten is that last year, when we did the KPMs, we realized that it was a big burden on commissioners to have to remember everything, all the details of what we had done over the past year. And as a volunteer commission, many of us did not have the time individually to go through every agenda for every preceding month and look at all the materials, look at all the votes we had taken before we filled out the KPMs. And so starting last July, I believe, Mara has gone through all of our agendas, all of our materials, and has summarized what we have done as a commission over the past year. So the bullet points under each of these 20 assertions, or 15 assertions, sorry, reflect Mara's summary of what we have done over the past year as reflected in our agendas and in our discussions and in our votes. This was meant not to try to affect the way that commissioners fill out the KPMs, but rather to give you information so that you don't need to go through every month's agenda and sort it all out for yourselves. So that's what's involved here. The only two action items are the ones about tweaking KPMs number 1 and number 2. So I'm happy to answer any questions. Kim Freeman, who's in charge of making all this happen on time for all of us, is also here. If people have questions I can't answer.
All right, thank you. Any questions of either Ms. Freeman or Vice Chair Mandelberg from anyone, specifically regarding these two suggested tweaks or additions? I don't see any. So are you asking, do we need an action item on this with a motion and a vote, or is this just sort of sense of the room?
You know, what the final thing says is the government subcommittee recommends the board approve the proposed language updates listed above, effective immediately, to be used on the upcoming board annual self-assessment survey. It's not listed as an action item, I don't believe, on the agenda. Going back to look at that. It is listed as an action item. So yes, we take a vote. Yeah.
So we can take a vote.
Yeah.
So what the governance subcommittees, the motion would be well, they spelled it out. The governance subcommittee recommends the board approve the proposed language updates listed in this memorandum effective immediately to be used on the upcoming board annual self-assessment survey. That could be a proposed motion someone could make.
I so move.
That's Commissioner Knabb. Is there a second?
Second.
Commissioner Leininger. I think that, Mara, let's go ahead and take a roll call on this.
Sure, no problem. Chair Harris,
Aye.
Vice Chair Mandelberg,
Yes.
Commissioner Kay,
Aye.
Commissioner Nab,
Yes.
Commissioner Leininger,
Yes.
and Commissioner Lopez.
Aye.
Thank you.
That's 6-4, no against, the motion passes. All right. So the next item is the executive session. Give me a second here. I got to get to my script on this one. Apologize. I got 3 screens open here. The Oregon Defense Commission will now meet in executive session pursuant to ORS 192.660 subsections 2F and 2H, as noticed on the agenda. Representatives of the news media and designated staff shall be allowed to attend the executive session. All other participants may not attend. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on or otherwise disclose any of the deliberations or anything said about these subjects during the executive session, except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. No decision may be made in executive session. At the conclusion of the executive session, Commissioners shall rejoin the public Zoom meeting to adjourn the regular Commission meeting. At this time, Commissioners, please exit the Zoom meeting and use the provided executive session link that you were emailed. One final note. Our attorneys requested we have the legal discussion first during the executive session so they can leave and call once we go into the budget discussion. All right. So we will rejoin in a minute.
are counted as true mandated caseloads. And I think we've made
Hey, Mara, are we recording yet?
Yes, we are.
Okay, and it looks like we have 5 voting members. 1, 2, 3,
Yes.
4, 5. Okay, I'm calling the Oregon Public Defense Commission meeting of August 19th back into session after coming into an executive session. And there is a proposed motion that the agency wants to set out, and then we will have the commission decide that proposed language. Mr. Amador, I believe you might have the language for what the agency is requesting.
Chair Harris, members of the commission, Ralph Amador, Chief Financial Officer for the commission. Your recommendation is recommend approval of the agency request budget for the 27-29 biennium and its subsequent submission.
That is the agency's request. Is there a motion to that effect?
So moved.
That's Commissioner Langer. Is there a second?
Second.
That's the Vice Chair Mandelberg. Mara, let's take a roll call.
Okay, Chair Harris,
Aye.
Vice Chair Mandelberg,
Yes.
Commissioner Kay,
Aye.
Commissioner Leininger,
Yes.
and Commissioner Lopez.
That's a thumbs up.
Thank you.
That's 5-0. The motion passes. Director Sandergan, is there any other business before we adjourn?
No, Chair, there is not.
All right, having completed the agenda items, we are now in adjournment. Thank you all for being here and sticking it out all morning. See you next time.
Thank you.